Meeting in progress. Candidates meeting, sound check.
Hello.
Hello,
Anya.
everybody. Can you hear
Sorry.
me?
Anya, it's Diane. Can you make Bridget a co-host, please?
I sure can.
Thank
What's
you.
Bridget's last name, Diane?
Foster.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks so much. Sorry for interrupting.
Not at all. All right. I think we're just about ready to start. Just bear with me for 2 seconds. Excellent. Great. And Lorraine, if you could pull up that presentation, that would be great. Hi, everybody. While Lorraine is doing that for me, I'll just welcome everybody to the candidate information session. Thank you all for being here. I am going to start our meeting with our land acknowledgement. The city of Hamilton is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Today, the city of Hamilton is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, North America, and we recognize that we must do more to learn about the rich history of this land so that we can better understand our roles as residents, neighbors, partners, and caretakers. So, again, thank you everyone for joining us for what is our second candidate information night. Tonight, we are going to be focusing on elections updates. But more specifically, we're going to have some information on the sign bylaw as it pertains to election signs. And of course, we have some representatives from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing who are going to be giving a presentation on election finances. Lorraine, can you scooch over to the next slide? Perfect. So before we get started, just want to say a big congratulations to everybody who's here tonight and all candidates. Truly, we have passed one of the first milestones as of August 22nd, when all candidates were certified by the city clerk. So congratulations on passing that milestone. And now the real work begins. So as I said, I'm going to ask Lorraine to pass over to the next slide as well. Lorraine, thank you. So a couple things on the agenda tonight. I'm going to be giving a brief update on the municipal election from the city of Hamilton. We're going to talk about sign bylaw, specifically do's and don'ts, as you are out in the community and your volunteers are setting up some signs for your campaign. We're going to talk about election finances, and we are going to do a Q&A session with the province where you will have an opportunity to ask questions. Just a couple of logistics as we go through the meeting. We are going to be holding questions until the end of each presentation. We are asking that you submit your questions one of two ways. You can email us at elections@hamilton.ca. We have staff that is currently monitoring the inbox. So at any time throughout the presentation, feel free to shoot an email to that email address and we will ensure that it's captured and then recorded. And secondly, you can ask a question through the chat feature of this WebEx. So there should be a button at the bottom of your screen, more options, next to the more options that has a little thought bubble cloud. If you click on that, it opens the chat feature and you're able to insert a question at that point. If you insert a question there, our staff will monitor and they will be asking those questions on your behalf. All of the questions that are asked tonight and all of the answers that are provided are going to be documented and we are going to make them available to all candidates. So for those of you who may want to go back and read what was said, we will have that available within the next few days following this session. In addition, any questions that you may not think of tonight as we go through the session, but think of later on or in the days to come, please feel free to reach out to elections@hamilton.ca. We can certainly help with answering your questions. If they are questions pertaining to some of the provincial information that you will hear tonight, you can direct them to Diane Ploss. She will be providing her information in her presentation. But alternately, you're always welcome to send through to elections@hamilton.ca, and we will make sure that that information goes to Diane for a response. I will ask that you mute yourself as the presenters are presenting. There is a button at the bottom of your screen that says mute. It just limits the noise as we're going through. So it would be appreciated if you could do that. And finally, for awareness, this session is being filmed and it is being live streamed on our City of Hamilton YouTube account and on the website. A recording will be placed on our website following this session, and also on the candidate portal should you wish to review it later. You will also find that the recording from our first session back in April is on our city website as well, if you do wish to go back and view that as well. Great, and I'll just remind everybody, please to mute themselves. That would be great. Awesome. All right. So before we get started, I also just want to introduce a couple of individuals. So we do have, as I said, Diane Ploss attending from the province. So she will be giving a presentation. And we do have Dan Smith, who is the manager of licensing and bylaw services, who will be speaking to you about the signed bylaw. And then lastly, we do have Tammy Reeves, who is a part of the elections team, who will be facilitating the second half of the session. Great. All right, Lorraine, if you could pass over to the municipal election updates. Perfect. And we'll go to the first page. I'm just going to start by giving a bit of a brief update and highlighting some key dates that are upcoming that you should be aware of as candidates. So in terms of upcoming key dates, September 23rd is approaching very quickly. This is when our vote by mail request period closes. So something to be aware of, residents of the City of Hamilton are able to request a vote by mail package between September 1st and the 23rd. The 23rd at 11:59 p.m., our website closes. So make sure that you get your requests in if you are requesting that, and share that news with individuals that you speak to. On September 26th, which is a Monday, you will be receiving your updated expenses from us, and additionally an updated voters list with additions that were made as people have added themselves to the voters list. We will share an email prior to that or to remind you of that in the candidate portal. We are getting very close to our advanced polls. So October 7th and 8th, we have advanced polls in each ward. So one location per ward. Location information is available on our website and additionally in the candidate portal. On the 11th and the 12th, we are hosting some legacy polls. I'll speak a little bit more to that in just a minute. The 14th and the 15th, we have another round of advanced polls. Those advanced polls, again, one per ward. And on the 18th, we have our ballot on demand poll at our post-secondary institutions in the city. So Mohawk, McMaster, and Redeemer. On the 21st, we've got our ballot on demand polls at the Hamilton Regional Indian Center and in our shelter systems. October 17th to the 21st is when we're going to be doing some tabulation of vote by mail and ballot on demand. And then finally, October 24th, Election Day. So there's a lot coming up in a very short period of time, dates that you should be aware of. Next slide, please. As a reminder, electors have a couple of options with regard to voting for 2022 in the City of Hamilton. So they can vote paper ballot with vote tabulator. That's at our traditional polls. And that will be open on advanced poll dates and additionally on election day. We are having advanced polls, so electors who cannot make the poll on election day do have the option to attend one of our advanced polls. Proxy voting is an option for voters as well who are unable to attend the poll. They can designate a person to act as their proxy. That is now open, and electors can start designating proxies should they wish to do so. Information is on the website about proxy voting. There is an option for curbside voting at the poll. So, should an elector not be able to get into the poll to cast a ballot, they are entitled to ask a ballot be brought to them at the poll voting location. So, that is an option for those who cannot make it inside. We do have accessible voting equipment. So one poll per ward does have accessible voting equipment. Those polls are consistent with the advanced poll locations. As you are aware of by now, we do have the special vote by mail for 2022. So this is a new process for us. And this is something that we're very excited about. The window is closing quickly. So electors do need to request by the 23rd of September. And then in addition, we do host institutional polls at polls locations that meet the requirement for institutions under the Municipal Elections Act, and like our legacy polls. Next slide, please. A bit of information on the advanced polls. So October 7th and 8th, and the 14th and 15th. The hours of these polls are as follows. So the Friday dates are 10 to 8, and on a Saturday, it's 10 to 5. As I said, one location in each ward. Accessible voting equipment is available at these polls, and information regarding these polls are available on the web and in the candidate portal. Next slide, please. In addition, we are hosting what we are calling legacy polls. So these are historical polls that have been held traditionally at the City of Hamilton in previous elections, have been referred to as special advanced polls. These polls has traditionally been those that have not quite fit the definition of institutional under the Municipal Elections Act. For 2022, these legacy polls are being maintained. Staff will be attending these polls October 11th and October 12th. These polls will be held in the morning and in the afternoon, sort of a pop-up poll, and a list of locations will be made available in the candidate portal. Next slide, please. Ballot on demand, as I said, so those are happening in October in the week prior to the election. So we do have our post-secondary polls occurring on the 18th from 10 to 7. Locations within the polls or within those schools are being finalized, so they will be added. Hamilton Regional Indian Center will be held on Friday, October the 21st. That poll will be from 10 to 8. Next slide. And on the 21st, we are additionally having 3 polls, one at Carol Ann's Place, one at Willow's Place, and one at a men's shelter location, which we are very excited about. So we're very excited about the ballot on demand polls for a couple of reasons. It's going to enable voters living anywhere in the city at these locations or attending these locations to receive a ballot for the ward in which they reside. So it's really convenient. In addition, it provides electors with the opportunity to vote in a location that is familiar to them, a part of their community, and really to vote where they feel supported. So we're very excited about these polls. Next slide. And then election day. So we do have 157 polls on election day. The list was publicized a couple of weeks back, is available on the candidate portal. On election day, our polls open at 10 a.m. and they close at 8 p.m. We've had a couple of questions about tabulation. So tabulation will occur at each poll when that poll is closed. Results will be printed and they will be posted at each poll. Results will be transmitted to the central count, and then results will be shared by the city broadly once they are received. Next slide, please. Just a reminder for those of you who may be out speaking to residents in the community, or just for your own awareness, a couple of processes that are underway currently. One of which is the getting people on the voters list. So to get on the voters list for somebody who does not currently appear on the voters list, they do have to complete an EL-15, which is an application to amend the voters list. Prior to election day, this application must be submitted in person in City Hall or at one of our municipal service centers across the city. But voters can also be added at the poll on a voting day. You can go to hamilton.ca/elections to check and see if you are on the voters list. So that is an option for voters to see whether they're there and whether they need to complete an application. Next slide, please. I do want to provide you with an update with regard to our COVID considerations as we are heading into the cooler months, and we're anticipating potentially more COVID issues, outbreaks, and so on. Just for awareness, we are currently working with public health to ensure that our COVID protocols meet the requirements of public health. We want to ensure that all electors, all staff working at the polls, all candidates and scrutineers who come into a poll location are safe, and that we are maintaining positive health and safety environment. So in order to do this, we are preparing for the fall by creating PPE or ensuring we have enough PPE at all locations. So this has been a part of our planning and supplies. We will have sanitizers, masks, screens, signage, and such. We're also employing enhanced cleaning protocols at all of our poll locations. We're going to be ensuring that individuals are physically distancing. And in addition, we have dedicated staff for the 2022 election to ensure that cleaning is happening. So they will be cleaning. We've got screeners and we've got cleaners for this round of elections. So we're doing our best to ensure that we make sure that all individuals who do enter a poll are safe, and that we're maintaining a positive environment. Next slide. And that is what I have for you tonight with regard to updates. We continue to post information in the candidate portal and online. And as always, if there are questions, please feel free to reach out to elections@hamilton.ca, and my team will be sure to get back to you. And at this time, I am going to pass it over to Dan Smith from Bylaw Services, who is going to be speaking to us about the signed bylaw do's and don'ts. I'm also going to be leaving the meeting, but Tammy Reeves will be taking over for me in my absence. So thank you, everybody. And again, elections@hamilton.ca should you have any questions. Thanks so much.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today about the election sign bylaw. And I just apologize in advance. I had a few technical difficulties getting a second screen working here, so I'm going to flip-flop between my two screens on my laptop here. So if anybody has a hand raised for some questions, or I guess questions can come through the chat as I mentioned earlier. I'm just going to be flipping back and forth between screens. So just wanted to share that. As I said, my name is Dan Smith, and I am the manager of licensing with the City of Hamilton. Licensing falls under Licensing and Bylaw Services Division of the Planning and Economic Development Department. And under the licensing portfolio, our team oversees the regulation of the Hamilton sign bylaw, which is 10-197. Schedule 1 of this bylaw speaks to election signs. As part of our responsibilities in overseeing this bylaw, our team of compliance officers will respond to complaints and provide some proactive patrols specific to this bylaw. There may be instances where our compliance officers are contacting campaign office, candidates specifically, or even property owners where signs may be displayed. I would recommend that each candidate and their teams review this bylaw, and specifically the schedule, to gain an understanding of the regulations within. It's ultimately the candidate's responsibility to ensure that your team and volunteers strictly adhere to the regulations within this bylaw. So at this time, what I'm going to do is just share some just general information within the sign bylaw, and specifically Schedule 1, the election signs. I'll talk about some general questions that we'll get related to this as well. So just in its basic form, so what is an election sign? So as per the bylaw, an election sign means any object, entity, thing, surface, structure, display, or any other component parts which are used as a visual medium or display for the purposes of advertising, promoting, opposing, or taking a position with respect to any candidate, election, political party, or question or bylaws submitted to the electors on the ballot. The election sign bylaw, the general provision within it is no person shall display or permit the display of an election sign except in accordance with section 4.1 of this bylaw, which is the general provisions and regulations, section 5.1 of this bylaw, which is the prohibited signs portion, and any specific regulation within the Schedule 1 of the sign bylaw. So again, as I said earlier, I would recommend you and your teams review the bylaw just to ensure that you understand all those regulations within Section 8 that I just read off to you about the permitted use. One point I want to make sure that is shared is a person shall be deemed to be displaying a election sign that if a person has custody of or control over the sign or the property in which the election sign is located. Timing for election signs. So no person shall display or permit the display of an election sign associated with the municipal election before 28 days in advance of voting day. So once we are within 28 days of voting day, election signs can be displayed. So this is notwithstanding section 11 is what I just read to you. So notwithstanding campaign office election signs where candidates may display these signs once a candidate has filed their nomination papers and paid the required fees, or a third-party advertiser has registered with the city clerk. That also applies to election vehicle signs, which may be displayed again once a candidate has filed their nomination papers and paid the required fees. Some general information about signs related to the bylaw is that no person shall display an election sign with an area that is greater than 1.5 meters and located for use on residential properties. Within the bylaw, the city identifies residential properties as the following: a single detached dwelling, a semi-detached dwelling, a duplex, a triplex, a fourplex or a quadruplex, a street townhouse, a mobile home, a residential care facility that has 6 or less residents, a lodging house for 6 or less residents, or a retirement home for 6 or less residents. Some information on locations. So related to city property, except as permitted within 2 different sections of this bylaw, which are section 21 and 23, No person shall display election sign on city property. However, the following election signs are permitted on the following portions of city property is if you are holding a handheld election sign, the display of a poster in accordance with the regulations set forth in section 5.8.2 of the bylaw. An election vehicle sign while affixed to a vehicle that is in use on any roadway in the city in accordance with all applicable laws and bylaws, or while use on any roadway as defined in the parks bylaw, or while authorized to be parked on any municipal parking lot, authorized on any street parking or public parking area or parking space as defined within the parks bylaw as well. The display of an election sign is permitted on commercial advertising space or operated by the city or one of its agencies, boards, or commissions where advertising has been approved by the city or one of its agencies, boards, or commissions. On private property, so no person shall display an election sign on any portion of a road allowance, excluding the portion between the sidewalk and the private property line, or where there's no sidewalk between the roadway and the private property line. It's typically where we'll see them. So specifically related to voting day, we want to make sure that no signs are displayed or permitted. We don't permit the display of an election sign at a property used as a voting place on voting day or on an advanced voting day, or at a property used for the administration of an election or the election purposes on voting day or an advanced voting day. And for clarity, Section 25, which is what I just read to you, related to signs on voting day, it also applies to election vehicle signs. I want to talk briefly about the removal of signs. So the candidates and third parties shall remove all election signs no later than 72 hours following 11:59 p.m. on voting day of the election from which the election sign is displayed. Where I'll go from here is there's some general questions that our team gets from time to time related to election signs. I have a few of them written down here, basically some frequently asked questions that I can share with you that you may have questions on yourself. The first one is, do I need a permit for an election sign? So the city does not require permits for the majority of election signs, and this includes ground signs, posters, or vehicle signs. However, there are some instances where a permit may be required under the Building Code Act, depending on the size of the sign, and if it's to be affixed to a building where the sign is a designated structure. If you need more information related to this type of use of an election sign, and if a permit is required, you can reach out to our office by email at signpermits@hamilton.ca. I'll repeat that. That is signpermits@hamilton.ca. However, remember, the majority of signs do not require a permit. I spoke to it really briefly, but where can I place my election sign on residential property? So an election sign can be on private property and on the city boulevard between the sidewalk and the property line, or as I said earlier, where no sidewalk exists between the roadway and the property line. Keep in mind, signs cannot obstruct the view of any pedestrian or drivers of a vehicle, obstruct visibility of any traffic signal or traffic control device, or interfere with vehicular traffic. And also, signs cannot be displayed within a visibility triangle. Visibility triangle is defined within the sign bylaw, if you would like to reference that. The next one that we see regularly is, what is a penalty for violating the sign bylaw? So failure to comply with requirements of the sign bylaw may result in the signs being immediately removed by our compliance team. An order to comply may be issued. A charge or for a violation of the sign bylaw pursuant to the Provincial Offences Act may be issued, or an administrative penalty issued in accordance with our bylaw 17-225, which is a bylaw to establish a system of administrative penalties. So now if you do find that you have election signs that have been removed, the election signs would have been removed only by our team if they were in violation of this bylaw. Our team does hold on to them for 28 days. And to make arrangements to pick up an election sign that has been removed, you can email licensing@hamilton.ca. Again, that is licensing@hamilton.ca. If it's within the 28 days, we will be able to return the sign. However, there are fees associated with this for the storage and removal of the signs that have been approved through the city's user fee and charges bylaw. After 28 days, the signs will be disposed of without notice or compensation. So those are some of the main questions that we get related to election signs. I would welcome you all to send any questions you have to our team, if you think of them following this meeting, to the email address I just shared with you again, licensing@hamilton.ca, and our team will be happy to assist you. I wish you all the best luck through your campaigns, and thank you very much.
God bless you. We appreciate it. Can we ask questions now or no?
Yeah, I believe so. I'm not sure who is jumping on to moderate, but I'm happy to take questions until such time as somebody else is jumping in with the next item on the agenda. If I don't have an answer to your question, I would be happy. I will be recording it, and I can absolutely respond to you as quickly as possible with that answer. But feel free to ask.
Okay, well, God bless you. I appreciate it. Really quick question. I understand there's bylaws around this, or not, there's bylaws to the signs. What about online stuff? Is there anything for online or no, that's just not covered?
That's something that's not covered under our bylaw. Our bylaw is specifically related to election signs as defined in the bylaw. It was one of those first items that I had read related to the definition of our bylaw. So it would be strictly related to the actual sign itself.
Okay, I really. Sorry. Just one last question. I apologize. One last question. God bless you. Thank you. Last question was, also regarding the signs, I know there's a couple bylaws where they can and can't go, but is there bylaws in terms of what can and can't be on them? Obviously, no nudity, no violence. Anything else that can't go on a sign or no?
I think the one thing that I will mention for sure is that the city logo, Hamilton Police, like things like that would not be permitted to be used. Those logos would not be permitted to be used. The Elections Act may identify the type of material that may be on the sign, but I don't believe that our sign bylaw specifically speaks to the content. However, I can review that and make sure that information is provided to you in the correct format.
Really appreciate it. Thank you so much. God bless you.
Hello there.
If I can jump in here, I will make a comment that the only thing the Municipal Elections Act requires is that you identify yourself as a candidate or a third-party advertiser on your signs.
Hello, I've got a question, if it's possible.
Walt, I believe you're going.
Yes, thank you. Last year, I was actually involved with actually signs with respect to another campaign, well, the last election, 2018. And then a couple of days before the election, we saw that we were going through sign wars where people were actually ripping down one candidate's sign and putting another candidate's sign in the same location. How do we deal with that?
Well, that's something you're going to Absolutely contact our office on. I mean, not only do we regulate the sign bylaw, but we can also look at the type of actions that are being either caused or put in place by individuals that may be causing some either damage to signs, things like that. And our team can certainly look into them. We work with Hamilton Police as well, and see if we can try and come up with a solution or try and track down an individual that may be causing this. And our offices would speak to them on that matter. We have received a few complaints about some instances like that already to this date. Our team has investigated them with some success. So I would recommend contacting our office first if you are identifying these issues. And again, that is licensing@hamilton.ca, or you can contact the City of Hamilton line at 905-546 2489 and ask to speak to the licensing department. And that's something that our team can investigate.
So that's you could do something like that in real time with the licensing app, the email. You think?
Yeah,
Or,
our team can look into it. Absolutely. So we
okay.
would look to see what the information we were able to obtain from either the complainant or the individual providing the information, and then our team would go and investigate the complaint.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Sorry, just to reiterate, so there's no rules around online anything? Like, isn't there any bylaws for like Facebook or something like this, or that just doesn't exist right now?
Not within municipal bylaws, no. It wouldn't be something that the City of Hamilton would regulate.
Okay, thanks a lot. So I can just do whatever I want? No, I'm just kidding. I'm good. God bless you. Thank you.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that there's no other legislation that may apply to that. It's just specific. The City of Hamilton would focus on the City of Hamilton election sign bylaw, so that's where that's where our attention is specifically. But that does not mean that there's any other regulation within any other legislation that may not have may not be applicable. Sorry, I see.
Hi, just as a reminder, all questions should be submitted through elections@hamilton.ca or through the chat function on this WebEx. All microphones should remain muted for the remainder of the presentation. So if you do want to submit a question, please elections@hamilton.ca or the chat function on WebEx.
Thank you. And I see a couple questions over on the other side chat about candidates having signs on their personal property already. I believe, unless I am corrected by somebody within our clerk's office, if a individual has their campaign office located at their home, campaign offices can display signs at this current time. But I believe that would have to be identified as their campaign office.
We have a few more questions. What are the bylaws for putting signs on parks or school areas?
Well, our parks bylaw and our elections sign bylaw would speak to that as city property. So the portion of the bylaw specifically about city property would apply to those. And school areas would be similar in that sense. Some, depending on the type of school, can be private property as well. So you would have to speak to those property owners, and that's another thing that if you place a sign on private property, you do need to ensure that you have the permission from that property owner in order to place a sign.
The next question we have, can you please repeat the rules for signs on vehicles?
Absolutely. Just bear with me. Just got to flip my screen again here so I pass on that information correctly. So again, it's everything that you may need to reference would be within our sign bylaw here, but an election vehicle sign in the bylaw is defined as any form of election site displayed in or on a vehicle, and that's excluding an election bumper sticker, which is different than an election vehicle sign. And the bylaw is election bumper sticker is defined as a label or sticker measuring not more than 7.62 centimeters, which is 3 inches, by 11.5 inches or 29.21 centimeters, which is affixed to a vehicle for the purposes of advertising, promoting, opposing, or taking position with respect to any candidate, election, or political party, or influencing electors to vote for or against issues associated with a candidate, election, or political party, or influencing electors to vote for or against any candidate or political party position. Again, that's defined in the schedule of the election sign bylaw if you wish to read that more thoroughly at a later date. But election vehicle signs, they're able to be used once the candidate has filed their nomination papers and paid their fees. And they can use municipal roadways. They can be parked legally on municipal streets, provided they're not in violation of municipal parking bylaws. But they also cannot be at the location of any voting location or any location that is used as an administration location for election day. I hope that provides some clarity for that.
Thanks. I've got 2 more, and we've got one that came in through email. Does the sign bylaw apply or allow for the use of non-motorized vehicles, like a bicycle or mobility device?
Good question. And off the top of my head, I would have to review our definitions a little bit further to identify if that would be a permitted use of an election sign. I would be looking to see if it meets definition of a vehicle, and that might be something through the Highway Traffic Act we have to identify. Andrea, that might be something that we're able to provide the candidates at a later date. And once I have an opportunity to look into that, it's a good question. Are there any other questions that are coming in? And again, if I apologize if I haven't answered your question specifically.
We do have one more. And we
Sure.
do know that we're having some audio issues, so please bear with us. Who controls the property of the city boulevard between the property line and the street? Can a candidate place a sign in front of a house on the boulevard without permission of the resident living at that address? Can the resident legally remove the sign?
Yeah, the residents for those portions of the property are maintained by the residents. They would be able to remove the sign if it's in front of their own personal property. You would have to have their permission in order to place the sign at that location.
Okay, one more question. As of what date can signs that are attached to a vehicle be allowed to be displayed? These are car magnets that list the candidate's name and ward.
Registration.
Vehicle election signs, as I mentioned earlier, are able to be displayed. So I'm trying to find my notes so I can read it as is in the bylaw. But vehicle election signs are able to be displayed following the date that the candidate has filed their nomination papers and paid their fees. They do not have to wait for that 28-day election sign period to begin.
Okay, thank you, Dan. If there aren't any more questions, we'd like to thank you for being here. And again, just reiterate that if you do have further questions after this evening for either Dan or anyone in the elections office, they can be submitted to the email elections@hamilton.ca or through the WebEx chat function. Next, I'd like to introduce Diane Ploss, who is a municipal advisor with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. Diane is here to discuss election finances with us. Thank you, Diane.
Thank you. I'm going to let you get that presentation set up, and I'll just start right here. My name is Diane Ploss, and I am from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. I'm a municipal advisor covering Muskoka, Niagara, and Hamilton. Attending along with me today is my colleague, Bridget Foster from the ministry. She is our senior municipal advisor. Today, we're here to present information for candidates and third-party advertisers and school board trustees on the financial aspects of the 2022 municipal elections. I would like to I'd like to thank the City of Hamilton clerks and election team for inviting us and for hosting this information session. Also, I would like to congratulate you for taking an interest in your community and in local government. As I mentioned, the presentation will focus on campaign finances for municipal and school board candidates and third-party advertisers. Some of the information will be quite in-depth, and I will encourage you to refer to this presentation, ministry guides, and financial regulation forms as you work your way through the campaign. So we will go on to slide 2. Right there. Yep, thank you. This is a disclaimer, and it's basically meant to say that these slides are meant to be a summary of legislation and should not be relied on for legal or official purposes, and will not cover every aspect of municipal elections. Next slide, please. Thanks. We hope, oh, sorry. It's okay. That one. Yep, thanks. We hope this session will provide you a better understanding of the process, the legislation, and improve your comfort level as you work through your campaign. Before we begin, I do want to mention a few things. The ministry has available a candidate, voter, and third-party advertising guide, regulation election forms, and these are all available on the ministry's website. Links are at the end of the presentation. We do encourage you to become familiar with these. You will hear us repeat this quite often through the presentation. If you have questions regarding topics in this presentation, please call your municipal advisor and contact us so that we can provide you some more information. And our contact information is at the end of the slide. If you have questions about municipal aspects like signs, you should address the municipal clerk. An overview. Here's a brief overview of what we're going to cover today. And as I move through the deck, I want you to remember that the primary goal of these rules is to ensure that campaigns raise and spend money in a manner that is transparent. There will be a question period at the end. If you have a question during the presentation, I'd suggest you jot it down and we will address it at the end, or type it right into the chat and we will address it at the end. Next slide, please. Contributions. Campaign accounts are only required if a candidate or third-party advertiser raises or spends money. So for acclamations and campaigns where no funds are raised or spent, there is no need for a campaign account. Trade unions, corporations are not eligible to contribute to candidates' campaigns, although they can participate in the election as a third-party advertiser or make contributions to third-party advertising campaigns. Municipalities must establish rules and procedures regarding the use of municipal or local board resources during the campaign period. This will encourage accountability and transparency and somewhat level the playing field with regard to incumbents. These rules must be passed by May 1st in the election year. Next slide, please. Contributions continued. Candidates can accept contributions from individuals who normally reside in Ontario and the candidate and their spouse. Contributions from a candidate and their spouse are considered to have come from the same person and count against the self-contribution limit. Third-party advertisers may accept contributions from individuals who normally reside in Ontario, trade unions that hold bargaining rights for employees in Ontario, and corporations that carry on businesses in Ontario. And a corporation is deemed to be a single corporation if one corporation controls the others directly or indirectly, or if all of the corporations are owned or controlled by the same person or group of persons, either directly or indirectly. Next slide, please. Contributions continued. This slide provides some information on what candidates and third-party advertisers cannot accept contributions from. As mentioned previously, only third-party advertisers can accept contributions from corporations and unions, and this also includes goods and services. Throughout the presentation, Bridget and I will probably take little breathers to give you some interesting tips or some best practices for your campaign. So one of the first ones I'm going to give you is the value of services provided by volunteers is generally not considered to be a contribution. However, if a volunteer provides a service for which they are usually paid, the market value of the service must be recorded as a contribution, and it is a campaign expense. So for example, if I have my neighborhood kids helping me put flyers in the door, that is not considered a contribution. However, if Bob, my neighbor, who is an accountant, wants to offer me accounting services, and that is his main source of income, I would have to report that as a contribution at market value and as a campaign expense. And the other thing you have to keep in mind with regard to this is contribution limits, and we will get to that. The other thing to talk about is candidates and third-party advertisers are obligated to inform their contributors about contribution limits. You will hear us later in the presentation talk about municipal clerks requiring to report on this. So you may want to find a way to track this particular information. Unfortunately, you're only going to be able to track your information, but what it is showing, it's showing your due diligence about being responsible. Next slide, please. Contributions continued. Campaign contributions are monies, goods, or services given to a candidate for his or her campaign, election campaign. Fundraising functions, bona fide fundraising functions, are events or activities held by or on behalf of a candidate for the primary purpose of raising money for a candidate's campaign. The price of admission to a fundraising function is a campaign contribution, and a receipt must be provided for the full amount. No anonymous contributions are permitted except at a fundraising function when it's in the form of a pass the hat. And just to tell you a little bit more about that, a pass the hat donations that are under $25 may be given anonymously if you do not, and you do not have to issue a receipt. This is campaign income and is not considered to be a contribution, and the total amount received must be reported as such in the campaign finance form. For more information on qualifying for a fundraising function, you need to look at your Form 4, Schedule 2. Outside of a fundraising function, cash contributions may only be accepted up to $25 and must be receipted. Contributions over $100, so $101, require that you need to record the name and address on the Form 4, and that becomes a public document. So these people need to be made aware that their name and address and their contribution will become public information. Contributions more than $25 must be made by check, money order, or by methods that clearly show where the funds came from. Receipts must be issued for every contribution, and they should contain the name and address of the contributor, the amount, and the date. These receipts cannot be used for provincial or federal income tax purposes. Next slide, please. Contribution limits. The limit on contributions to any one candidate or registered third-party advertiser is $1,200 to a maximum of $5,000 in any one jurisdiction. And when I say the word jurisdiction, I mean a municipality, a school board district. So for example, I can give $1,200, $1,200, $1,200 to a maximum of $5,000 in Hamilton, and I can give $1,200, $1,200, $1,200 up to a maximum of $500 in Burlington. So there is an aggregate total per jurisdiction. To reinforce again, a candidate and third-party advertisers are required to inform contributors of these contribution limits. A contributor may face penalties under the Municipal Elections Act if they exceed these limits. Note that once the financial filing deadline has passed, the municipal clerk is required to review the submissions with a specific focus on contributions. If it appears a contributor has exceeded one or more of their limits, the clerk must report this to the Compliance Audit Committee, and that committee will decide whether to proceed with legal action. One of the things you may want to do is consider identifying those limits with a little sticker on your receipts. If you receive a contribution on a joint account check, you must determine which of the jointed parties are making the contribution for receipting purposes. If more than one are contributing, it must be done on separate checks, and there must be a separate receipt issued to the two individual parties. Another tip, you are required to return any contribution that was made or accepted in contravention of the Municipal Elections Act as soon as you learn that it was an ineligible contribution. If you cannot return the contribution, you must turn it over to the municipal clerk. You can find more information on this in the guides. Next slide, please. Slide, self-funding limits, or how much money can my spouse and I give to my campaign? Any cash, goods, or services contributed to your campaign by you and your spouse count towards your self-funding limit. The self-funding limit for municipal council candidates is based on the number of electors for the office to a maximum of $25,000 per candidate. This limit also applies to contributions made by the candidate's spouse. And you can see here on this slide how you can go about making that calculation. The highest self-funding limit that anyone can possibly have is $25,000. There are no self-funding limits for school board or third-party advertisers. Next slide, please. Borrowing. Loans can only be borrowed from a bank or an other recognized lending institution in Ontario and must be directed immediately into the campaign account. Loans may only be guaranteed by the candidate or their spouse. You can't receive a loan from family members or from any corporate accounts that you may have access to. While candidates can open their own campaign account with their own funds, the candidate cannot loan funds to his or her campaign to kickstart it with the intention of getting it all back. The only way that the candidate can reclaim this startup amount is after the election campaign period is ended and prior to filing your financial statement. The candidate will or his or her spouse will have an opportunity to be refunded contributions from that surplus. The loan is not considered to be campaign income, and paying it back is not considered a campaign expense. But if you or your spouse guaranteed the loan and the campaign does not repay all of it, the remaining balance is a contribution by the candidate or his or her spouse. Keep in mind, you have to think about that self-funding limit. So if you are borrowing, you have to carefully watch those numbers. Any interest on the campaign paid on the loan is a campaign expense. Next slide, spending limits. The spending limit formula for candidates and the maximum amount for parties and expressions of appreciation after voting day are set out in an Ontario regulation. The clerk calculates the spending limit twice. You've all, those of you who've been nominated, you have received your first spending limit estimate. The second estimate is based on the voters list that exists on September 15th, 2022. And this calculation must be provided to candidates on or before September 25th. Whichever number is higher, it is the spending limit. That is the final, and the clerk's information is final. I'm going to take a sip here. Next slide, please. Third-party advertising spending limits. The campaign finance rules are generally the same for third-party advertisers as they are for candidates. Both are subject to contribution limits and have calculated spending limits. If a third-party advertiser has registered in more than one municipality, each registration is a separate campaign with its own spending limit because those are based on electors. And therefore, financial filings must be kept separate. Often, third-party advertisers who are advertised in registered in several municipalities will contemplate joint purchases in order to take advantage of bulk orders. This is permitted. However, the joint purchase must be apportioned across the campaign financial filing. Third-party advertisers are also required to ensure contribution expenses are tracked and accounted for, and that includes proper record retention, providing proper direction to those incurring expenses or accepting contributions on their behalf, and that spending limits are adhered to. Next slide, please. Expenses not subject to the spending limit. Most expenses are subject to the spending limit. Those that are not are listed in this slide. Expenses related to fundraising functions are exempt from the campaign spending limit. Remember, I was talking about that special classification of fundraising functions, bona fide fundraising functions, and I referred to Schedule 2 of Form 4. Those fundraising functions are exempt from campaign spending limits. But again, in order to qualify, it must be the purpose of the event must be primarily raising of money. Campaign events which incidentally raise campaign events which incidentally fundraising takes place do not qualify for a fundraising function. Example, a barbecue to announce that your platform, and you've got a table off to the side where you take contributions, that does not qualify. Similarly, a brochure promoting awareness of the candidate that contains contact information to make campaign contributions, that does not qualify. Expenses that were subject to the spending limit if incurred before voting day are not subject to the spending limit if incurred after voting day. But this does not permit you to play with your expenses. If there was a purchase made pre-election, you took possession of the goods, you used them during your campaign, but the invoice came in after the election, you must claim this as an expense subject to the spending limit. Essentially, if you will not be able to clearly demonstrate that the primary function of the event was fundraising, the following expense and contribution rules for the campaign, the expense and contribution rules are related to a regular event. And at this point, I'd like to ask Bridget to come forward, turn her camera on, and take over.
Okay, so next slide, please. We're on, so campaign expenses. So as a candidate and third-party advertiser, you should become familiar with the campaign expense provisions. So campaign expenses are those costs incurred by the candidate or on behalf of the candidate during his or her campaign or by a third-party advertiser during their campaign. The nomination filing fee is no longer an expense and is not included on the financial disclosure form. Goods and services donated to the campaign are also expenses and must be reported. A receipt must be provided for fair market value for all goods and services received. Only nominated persons and or third-party advertisers can incur expenses during their campaign period. So payment of any campaign expense must be drawn directly from the campaign account, and a receipt providing the details and proof of payment must be provided to the contributor. All expenses must be reported in the relevant financial disclosure form to be filed with the clerk by the candidate or the third-party advertiser. So one of the things that we often get asked is how should a candidate treat credit card purchases? So when making credit card purchases, you need to keep notes and clear records showing that the expense on the credit card was reimbursed from the campaign account. Another question that we seem to be getting asked this term is about PayPal or Gofundme contributions. So candidates are responsible for keeping complete records of each contribution. You should be able to demonstrate that they have complied with the campaign finance rules, particularly if they become subject to a compliance audit. So if any payments have been made via PayPal, check, etc., or anonymous, the payments would be deemed ineligible and must be turned over to the clerk. Candidates will need to ensure all contributors are eligible. So what that means is that all contributions must come from individuals who are residents of Ontario and not from a corporation or a trade union. You must be able to verify details required on a receipt. Another thing to keep in mind is that if an online platform takes a portion of the contribution, that is a campaign expense. So if someone makes a $100 contribution and the candidate gets $98 out of that contribution, that's a $100 contribution and a $2 campaign expense, not a $98 contribution. Again, please note that the nomination filing fee is no longer an expense and is not included on the financial disclosure form. Next slide, please. So with respect to campaign inventory, if you ran in the last election and want to use leftover goods such as signs or office supplies, you must determine the current market value for those goods or what it would cost you if you were to purchase them today. These amounts are recorded as an expense. Conversely, if you end up with leftover inventory at the end of this campaign and it becomes your personal property, but you want to store them to use in another future election, any costs for storage are not considered campaign expenses. So only nominated persons and or third-party advertisers can incur expenses during their campaign period. And remember, payment of any campaign expense must be drawn from the campaign account, and a receipt providing details and proof of payment must be obtained. And then also to remember, all expenses must be reported in the relevant financial disclosure form to be filed with the clerk by the candidate or the third-party advertiser. Next slide, please. So as a candidate or a third-party advertiser, it is important that you be fully aware of the responsibilities regarding election spending and accepting campaign contributions. So we are often asked if there is a requirement for every candidate to have a chief financial officer, and the answer is no. You are the one who might be subject to scrutiny and penalty. However, since you may have some assistance with your finances, you may wish to create a procedure document to assist those supporting you in your campaign. And then familiarizing yourself with the guides, the forums, and the Municipal Elections Act will help you guide you in organizing your records and how they have to be reported. You are required under the Municipal Elections Act to keep accurate records and open a campaign bank account if you are spending money or accepting any contributions. So a reminder, a bank account is not required if a candidate or third-party advertiser does not receive nor spend money. You do not need to have a bank account if raising or spending money, including those self-funding their campaign. Next slide, please. So campaign finance rules. So candidates and third-party advertisers are required to keep complete records and accurate financial statements during the campaign. All contributions and expenses are to be accounted for and disclosed by the candidate on the relevant prescribed financial form. All candidates and third-party advertisers are required to keep all campaign financial records until after November 15th, 2026, when a new council takes office. So these rules apply whether you have been elected or not. A tip that we often give is to make sure you organize your records and financial information in a manner that makes it easy to follow and find information. This will help you remember, and it will be important if you are called to the Compliance Audit Committee. If anyone is helping you with your campaign finances, please make sure that they have read the guides and the financial forms and understand the different ways in which contributions, campaign income, fundraising events, and spending limits are treated. Next slide, please. So this slide outlines some best practices for keeping your campaign finances organized. Well, I hope that none of you become subject to a compliance audit review. We encourage you to document and prepare yourself in the event you are faced with one. Remember, again, you must keep these records until the next council is elected in 2026. Next slide, please. So financial statements. I know we referenced this previously, but all candidates are required to file Form 4 or Form 8 for third-party advertisers with the clerk, regardless of how much or how little you spent or fundraised. If you filed a nomination form, you must file a Form 4. This form is required even if you withdrew your nomination or were acclaimed. If a candidate or third-party advertiser feels they will not meet the deadline, they may apply to the Superior Court of Justice for an extension prior to the March 31st, 2023 deadline. So if you have not filed your financial statement by the deadline, you may file your financial statement within 30 days after the deadline if you pay the municipality a $500 late filing fee. This grace period ends at 2 p.m. on Monday, May 1st, 2023. You will not receive a refund for your nomination fee if you file during this 30-day grace period. Next slide, please. The appointment of an auditor by the candidate is mandatory if expenses or contributions or both exceed $10,000. The auditor must be licensed under the Public Accounting Act 2004. So book your auditor early if you think you will be in this position. Keep in mind that the campaign statements are public documents and will be available for members of the public to inspect, and the public may scrutinize them, so the more accurate, clear, detailed information you provide might help to reduce questions raised. Next slide, please. So the candidate's campaign period ends January 3rd, 2023, and they can file their financial documents at any time after voting day until the deadline of March 31st, 2023. Filing the financial statement ends the campaign period. This will make it easier for acclamations and campaigns where little or no expense is incurred. clerks are required to report whether candidates have met their financial filing obligation and publish that report on the municipal website or in another electronic form. This needs to be done by April 30th in the case of a regular election. Next slide, please. The nomination fee is only refundable if the financial statement is filed on time. Again, if a candidate or third-party advertiser feels that they will not meet the deadline, they can apply to the courts for an extension prior to the March 31st, 2023 deadline. Again, a candidate or third-party advertiser who misses the filing deadline may file within the 30-day grace period, provided a $500 late filing fee is paid to the municipality. So a candidate who chooses to file within the 30-day grace period will be subject to both the $500 late filing fee as well as the loss of their nomination refund. A candidate or third-party advertiser may resubmit a financial statement to correct an error up until the filing deadline. Next slide, please. So this is if you file, how to file if you switch campaigns. So sometimes a candidate changes their mind and decides to run for a different office. Since you can run for only one office at a time, if the candidate filed a second nomination, the first nomination would have been deemed to be withdrawn. If a candidate decided to run for a different office on the same council or school board and both positions are elected at large, everything from the first campaign is transferred to the second campaign, and only one financial statement needs to be filed. Unless the candidate decides to run for a different office on the same council or school board and one or both offices is elected by ward, the two campaigns must be kept separate and two financial statements must be filed. Next slide, please. So surplus. When filing the financial statement, a candidate or third-party advertiser with a campaign surplus must pay the entire amount to the clerk. Prior to paying over any surplus funds to the clerk, a candidate or third-party advertiser is entitled to a refund of any contributions they or their spouse made to the campaign, but not anybody else that contributed. The amount that may be refunded is the lesser of the amount of the relevant contribution or the amount of the surplus. So for example, if there was a surplus of $500 and the total contributions made by the candidate was $400, the candidate would be entitled to the $400, and the remaining $100 must be turned over to the clerk of the municipality. The clerk is required to place surplus monies in trust for use by the candidate or third-party advertiser if they require it for a compliance audit. If neither the candidate nor third-party advertiser requires the funds for these purposes, it becomes the property of the municipality or the school board. Next slide, please. So compliance audit. Every council and school board must establish a compliance audit committee. Members of a committee cannot be members of the council or school board, an employee, a candidate in the election, or a registered third-party advertiser. Once the financial filing deadline has passed, the clerk will review the contributions reported on the financial forms. They are required to prepare a report for consideration by the Compliance Audit Committee if a contributor appears to have exceeded any of the contribution limits. This process is not connected to the compliance audit process. If it is apparent to the clerk that a contributor has exceeded one or more of the contribution limits, the clerk would report this to the committee, which would meet to determine whether to proceed with legal action. An elector who is entitled to vote in an election and believes on reasonable grounds that a candidate has contravened a provision of the Municipal Election Act relating to election campaign finances may apply for a compliance audit of the candidate's election campaign finances, even if the candidate has not filed a financial statement. The application must be in writing and set out the elector's reasons for why they believe the Municipal Elections Act has been contravened. The application must be submitted to the municipal clerk or the secretary of the school board within 90 days of the filing deadline. The Compliance Audit Committee will consider the application and decide whether to retain an auditor to undertake a compliance audit of the candidate's financial return. Next slide, please. So what happens after a complaint? Once a complaint has been filed, the Compliance Audit Committee is required to review and provide brief written reasons for its decision related to the review of the financial submission. Compliance Audit Committee meetings are required to be open to the public, but the committee may deliberate in private as well. The written reasons for the committee's decision on a compliance audit request shall be given to the candidate, the clerk with whom the candidate filed his or her nomination, the secretary of the local school board, if applicable, and the applicant. If an audit occurs, the auditor's report must be circulated to the same individuals. The audit committee considers the auditor's report, and if the Compliance Audit Committee determines that there has been an apparent contravention of the Municipal Elections Act, the committee will decide whether to proceed with legal action. Decisions of the committee may be appealed to the Superior Court of Justice. So if a person who believes that a candidate has contravened the Municipal Elections Act may proceed with legal action without having first obtained a compliance audit. So one of the tips we gave, I know we've mentioned a little bit, run your campaign and keep your records like you know you will be going to the Compliance Audit Committee. Next slide, please. So offenses. An offense as described in Section 90, subsection 3 of the Municipal Elections Act defines a corrupt practice, and a person who commits it is, on conviction, disqualified from voting at an election until the next regular election has taken place after the election to which the offense relates, in addition to being liable to any other penalty provided for in this act. Next slide, please. So penalties. So in general, the penalties listed in this slide are available to the courts upon conviction of an offense under the Municipal Elections Act. Just to note, ineligibility to vote is a penalty if you are convicted of a corrupt practice. You can see this in Section 90 of the Municipal Elections Act. Next slide, please. So these are some of the key dates to remember. Voting day is on Monday, October 24th, 2022, between 10 a.m. to 8 p.m., unless reduced hours are set out in a bylaw for retirement homes and institutions, or council has passed a bylaw to open voting earlier than 10 a.m. The candidate campaign period, the time when a candidate can accept contributions and incur election expenses, runs from the date the nomination was submitted up until January 3rd, 2023. And the same goes for the third-party advertisers. Their campaign period, the time that they can incur expenses, begins on the date their registration is certified. So the earliest was May 1st, and it runs until January 3rd, 2023. Again, the deadline for filing of the campaign financial statement in the clerk's office is Friday, March 31st, 2023, no later than 2 p.m. All candidates and third-party advertisers must file this statement regardless of how much they spent or received in contributions. Next slide, please. So these are a list of resources that are available for you to prepare you for your campaign and your filing your financial forms. So the first section of links will take you to the e-laws website, where all provincial legislation is available online, including the associated regulations. You will want to be very familiar with the Municipal Elections Act, the Municipal Act, the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, and if running for school board, the Education Act. The second link is to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing website. From this site, you will be able to access the 2022 Voters Guide, the Candidates Guide, and the Third-Party Advertisers Guide. And then the last one is the Municipal World website. You will find a list of books that may also help you in your campaign. Next slide, please. So this is the conclusion of our presentation. I know it was a lot of information, and thank you for listening. At this time, I think that we will be taking questions.
I think there are a number of questions in the chat.
Okay.
I'll let Hamilton staff moderate those. If you want, I can find them and read them.
Be good, thank you.
You want me to look at them? Okay. So do you want me to go?
Sorry, we're having a mic issue again. But
Okay,
the
let me go then.
questions,
And if I mess up, you come in and fix me.
wonderful. There are 4 in the chat.
I thought so. So starting with can you?
Couple have come through email, so we'll put
Okay.
those in the chat as well for you, Diane.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the first question that I see is it required that a contributor live within the municipality? And the answer to that is no. They must be, they must normally, they have to be an elector in Ontario. They don't necessarily have to reside within the particular municipality. So the next question, maybe I'll get Bridget if you want, we want to tag team this. Can you please clarify the definition of who, what a third-party advertiser is?
Okay.
You good with that one?
I think so. So it's not a candidate. It's someone who is registered as a third-party advertiser in the municipality, and they can accept donations from businesses, trade unions, and individuals who live in Ontario. But they do have to be registered with the municipality prior to any advertising.
The other thing, and I think the thing that really makes it, the Municipal Act defines, is that a third-party advertiser registers and then can advertise to oppose or support a candidate or a yes or a no answer to a ballot. And I think that what is one of the distinctions, and again, of course, what Bridget mentioned as far as who can be a third-party advertiser as opposed to a candidate. And then the final question that I see in the chat so far, the contributions are tax deductible? No, they are not. Any contribution to a municipal candidate, third-party advertiser, or school board candidate are not, they cannot use those for provincial or federal income taxes.
There seem to be a few more questions in the chat. We're gonna just, if you could just give us a few seconds.
No, I just need to slide down so I can keep going.
Great. So the next one starts with
if
someone makes a contribution.
So if someone makes a contribution as an individual through an e-transfer and they use a work email, is this still considered an individual? E.g. union member who uses their union email. Okay, I can't give you specific yeses and nos. I can tell you that there are rules for contributors and there are rules for accepting contributions. And both of those things need to be satisfied on either party. And that includes being able to receipt a name, an address, an amount, and a date. And if taken to the Compliance Audit Committee, they have to be able to verify everything. So when you are using a different email address, particularly a union or an employer's, it may be very difficult for that candidate who's sitting in front of a Compliance Audit Committee to verify. So again, I can't tell you yes or no, but there certainly are some cautions and concerns with regard to that situation. Bridget, do you have anything to add to that? Oh, can't hear you.
I was muted, sorry. No, I don't have anything to add. Do you want me to read the next question?
Yeah, go right ahead, please.
So just want to clarify, for donations over $100, it's just the donor's personal name that becomes public information, or their name and address. I believe it's their name and address that gets published.
Correct. The next one, hello, I'd like to know more on fundraising your own campaign and receiving no donations. That would be self-funding your campaign, and you would be subject to the self-funding limits. So you and your spouse would be a single contribution. And there is in the presentation, and you can certainly ask the clerks about this, there is a calculation that is done to identify your maximum self-contribution limit. Again, Bridget, anything to add?
No, that sounds good.
You want to go to the next one?
Sure. The next question is a little bit similar. If you finance your whole campaign yourself, can it be claimed under income tax? The answer is no. There's no income tax refunds on these.
Next question, do we have to set up a separate account for campaign donations? Absolutely. It is in the Municipal Elections Act. So I always recommended to folks that the day you took your nomination papers in, that you immediately went to your bank and opened an account that was dedicated for your campaign. You do not want to use a personal account.
Okay.
Anything else? Go.
No, so the next question is, can we consider credit card purchases made by the candidate as a donation in kind rather than reimbursement? There are additional banking fees involved with reimbursement from the campaign bank account. So all your credit card purchases must be paid directly from your campaign account. I think that answers that part of it.
And that would also, if they're trying to say that, yeah, you're right. If they pay it from their campaign account, they're fine. But if they don't pay it, it's actually a donation. But and you could consider that a candidate's donation of goods. But again, once you start getting into funny stuff, that's when folks can really start digging deep into your financials. Keep it clean, follow the act. Next one, what's the maximum amount a person may donate to a campaign? To an individual, $1,200. To an aggregate maximum of $5,000 per jurisdiction.
So the next question is there a process for issuing receipts? So I think Diane covered this a little bit. You know, some of the need to have their name. You should put the contribution limits, the amount. The receipts should be numbered. Did I miss anything? On the slide deck, I think it covers everything that should be in a receipt, I believe. We went over that.
Yeah. Yep. Where does the donor over $100 address get published? We have to tell a few donors now. What do we do if they want to be refunded for privacy's sake? Well, first thing, it goes on your Form 4, which is your financial submission, and there is a very specific schedule for those who have donated over $100. And once somebody has made a donation to a campaign, it cannot, under the Act, be refunded.
Okay. So the next question is, if the expenses are done in foreign countries and their currency. So there's nothing in the Act that says you can't purchase some of your campaign expenses outside of the country, but you would have to have a value that you paid for it in Canadian currency, and you'd have to list that as an expense.
How is the max self-funding tabulated for those trustees? Trustees and third-party advertisers don't get self-funding opportunities or self-funding limits.
Okay, so the next one is moreover, if all the purchases are done before the nomination, will that be included in expenses?
You cannot make any purchases. You cannot raise funds or spend money before your nomination is filed. You are in conflict with the Municipal Elections Act.
Okay, so the next one, I'm not sure. It says, can I open the account? I think it means I can.
What do you mean? The candidate needs to open the bank account. I think that's what you're getting at.
And only if you spend or receive funds.
Got it. Perfect. Do you want to take the next one since I jumped your question?
So it says, besides this Form 4, where does the donor's personal address get published for public viewing? On a website, perhaps? Okay, so so on your Form 4, it would only be on your Form 4, but your Form 4 does become a public document, and usually municipalities post those on their website. And I think that's it.
Anything else, or were we not clear on some of the questions we answered?
Thanks so much, Diane and Bridget. If there are any more questions that anyone has further to this evening, please feel free to send them through to either Diane and Bridget at the contact information they listed or to elections@hamilton.ca. We just want to take a moment to thank all of our presenters tonight and for everyone being here and your patience while we work through a few audio issues. Thank you again, and we hope everyone has a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.